Hey Blender Maniacs, this is Alex Cordbar for BlenderMania3.com, and have I got some exciting news for you guys today. With the new release of Blender 2.82, we have a new fluid engine using Mantaflow. Now this replaces the old system for smoke, fluid, and gas, and it is absolutely awesome. So in this video, we're going to take a quick overview of this new fluid simulation and fluid engine using Mantaflow. Alright, let's get right to it. First, I'm going to delete the default cube, and I'm most likely going to do another video later on, which will be more in-depth. This is more of an overview. Alright, Shift-A, add mesh, UV sphere, and bring that UV sphere up. Now let's go to the Physics tab, and we're going to enable Fluid. And under None, we're going to switch it to Flow. Now it looks pretty much the same up until now. Now you can see the flow type. We have different flow types. We could set it to smoke, fire plus smoke, fire, or liquid. Now obviously here we're looking at the liquid simulation or the fluid simulation. So let's select liquid. Then over here you will also notice another change is on the initial velocity. We can now make it start going out from the possibility to set the velocities based on the X, Y, or Z axis or on the normals. How cool is that? Now the initial velocity is the starting or the force through which the fluid goes. So if you want it to eject downwards, you would put a velocity on the negative Z axis so that it pushes downwards like a hose, etc. on the other axes. For now, I'm just going to leave it at 0. Alright, now just like before, we have to hit Shift-A, add a mesh cube, and scale this up. And again, this Mantaflow replaces the old system completely. And it is really, really cool, as you'll see in a second. Here we're going to add a domain, and this is basically where our fluid simulation will take place. Make sure that your domain encompasses your inflow object or your sphere and any other objects that might be in your fluid simulation. I'm going to scale it up just a little bit more, bring it up. Alright, now with this, we're going to click on fluid as well, and we're going to change this one to domain. And now you might notice quite a bit of different options as quite a lot of this has changed and improved. For one thing, we have a domain type, once again, gas or liquid. For here, we're going to select liquid. Then right here, just like before, we have the resolution of our domain, which is going to be the resolution of our liquid. And we have the scale and the time factors, very much similar to before. Now, one new thing that we have is the border collision. We could actually set which faces of our domain have collision with the fluid. How cool is that? So by default, they're all selected. But let's say you don't want the fluid to collide with the bottom face. You would just deselect bottom and it would no longer collide with that. Now right here we have the new Flip Solver. And this doesn't make use of any of the older simulation settings. This is a completely new solver right here. You can see simulation method flip, and we have a bunch of different options right here. Right now, I'm just going to leave them to default. Probably in another video, I'm going to go more in depth into these new settings and all that good stuff. And right here, you can see that liquid is enabled. Alright, so now this works quite differently, and you'll see in just a second. But for now, just like before, with our sphere inflow object and our bounding domain box right here, we're going to select bake data and just go ahead and bake that data. And now you'll see that it's baking down here, fluid bake. Once it reaches 100%, I'll be back and we'll continue from there. Alright, now that it's done baking, let's try hitting play. And you might notice something that it looks like it's not working because before it would turn into liquid. But if we go into our box, boom! It is a catastrophe of atoms and particles in here. How cool is that? Now, this is the new Mantaflow system that's being used, and it's just super, super awesome. But as you can tell, our fluid is actually particles. If we go to the particle settings right here, you can see it's added a new liquid fluid, and it's actually a particle system. And it has 488,000 fluid particles in this frame. That's all great and all, but it doesn't really look like water. So what do? Well, let's go back to the physics tab. And there are actually 3 components to bake in this new system. There's the liquid particles, the mesh, and the secondary particles. So right now we baked the liquid particles. And again, let me hit shift left arrow to play that. You can see what that looks like here. Let me try to get our sphere in the view. You can see what this looks like here. It's pretty cool, but again, doesn't look like liquid. So now what we have to do is, again, with our domain selected, let's go over here, and you can see that we have an option mesh. Let's toggle this down and click the mesh right there, the little check mark, and you can see that now it is actually taking on a form of the mesh. So the particles are taking on a form of the mesh. Now the actual the simulation component for each of these particle systems, the mesh, the particles, and the secondary particles, can basically have its own resolution. So here we had different resolution here that we could bake, and now we could bake the mesh with some different settings right here and different resolutions. For now, I'm just going to bake it at the default. So I'm going to click on Bake Mesh, and now it's going to bake the mesh, and we have to give this another couple seconds for this to bake. All right, now we've baked the mesh. Let's take a look at what we got. And if I rewind it, hit the spacebar to play, check it out. How cool is that? Now, again, this new simulation system is a lot better. It calculates a lot better. As you can see right now, it's a little too intense, but it is super, super awesome. Now, that's not it. But wait, there's more. Bake 1 component in the fluid simulation, get 2 more for free. So again, we baked the liquid particle system, we just baked the mesh, but my favorite new part is under particles right here, we could bake in some spray, foam, or bubbles. What? That is crazy. So we could actually bake in secondary particles, again, of spray, foam, and bubbles. So shoot, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select spray, foam, and bubbles. Now we got a bunch of different options here. Again, I'm probably going to do another tutorial later on, going more in depth on all these different settings in these new simulations. But for now, I'm just going to select all 3, leave them to the default, and I'm going to click on Bake Particles. Click on Bake Particles. All right, we just finished baking the secondary particles. Man, that's a lot of baking for one tutorial. But check it out. We've baked these, and now where do you find these? Quite simple. Again, in the particle settings right here. You can see we have the original liquid, and now we have spray, foam, and bubbles. How cool is that? So all these little particles right here are the spray, foam, and bubbles. And how do you change these? Well, for example, let's say we want to go to the bubbles. We could go right here, check it out, and it says we have 4,000 bubbles. Brilliant. Now, how do we change these to bubbles? Quite simple. One of the ways, if we toggle render, you can see right now it's rendering as a halo, but let's go ahead and change this to an object. Then, hitting Shift-A, we're going to add a UV sphere right there, and I'm going to change the segments and rings. Let's just put them to 8. As there's going to be a lot of these. And then I'm going to move it out of the way. Now, going back to here, I'm going to select the instance object to be sphere 001. And now check it out. We have the spheres as the bubbles. Now, obviously, you would add a material to this sphere to make it look more like a bubble, etc., etc. But we could do the same thing for the foam and the spray. For example, the foam, let's just add an icosphere. Grab that out, and I'm just going to turn on proportional editing and maybe deform this a little bit in some random about way. Go back here, go to the foam, render it as an object, and select the icosphere. And boom, now we have foam. Of course, you would have to play around with the settings, add materials to this, make it a lot smaller so that it's not so intrusive, etc., etc. But how cool is that? And there you go. With this new fluid engine using Mantaflow, we could get some really cool results. Once again, you could bake 3 different components. You could bake the liquid particles, the mesh, and the secondary particles. And again, the result is much more realistic. It's a lot cooler. Now, of course, here we haven't tweaked any of the settings. It's just a quick overview of this new fluid engine using Mantaflow. But in another tutorial, I'll go over it more in depth. Hope you enjoyed this video. Take a look at it for yourself and play around with the different settings. It is absolutely awesome and cool. And now you could just add a material to this, make it look like water, make the bubbles look more like bubbles, etc., etc. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Ciao for now. Au revoir.